All right. Okay, that's it. Good evening, everyone. Hello, and welcome to TUBA, Bratislava Center for Architecture and City Planning, to the next of our Start with Children lecture series. My name is Petra Marko. I'm the founder of TUBA and the CEO of the Metropolitan Institute of Bratislava. We are the organizer and host of this lecture series. And a warm welcome to everyone who is joining us on the live stream online. Are we streaming? Yes, perfect. Start with Children was set up with the support of our mayor, Matúš Valo, and Bloomberg Philanthropies 2 years ago, bringing together leading voices in urban planning, architecture, and city making to highlight and explore how designing cities that truly work for children work for everyone. And this year we are continuing with a lecture series supported by Nadácia Allianz, ATOPS, Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands, and in Bratislava, and the Komárek, Karel Komárek Family Foundation. Thank you very much for your support. And our topic today is going to be about women leaders changing cities. This is a very interesting topic because out of 300 mayors of cities, only 25 are women. Yet we hear these really impactful, transformative stories about cities such as Paris or Bogota or Sydney that have actually come up with a different way of transformation, of change, of leadership, which is looking in a much more multimodal and intersectional way of how we can actually approach climate adaptation, inclusivity, social issues, and mobility in cities. And I am delighted to welcome tonight with us Melissa Bruntlett and Chris Bruntlett, who are mobility leaders and authors of the book Women Changing Cities. And they will tell us more about these transformational stories. They've traveled around the world interviewing 19 women leaders, either mayors or transport leaders in cities. And one of those cities is also Tirana. And so I'm super happy also to welcome with us here tonight Simon Battisti, American architect based in Tirana in Albania, who's running an NGO focused on school streets and transformations around schools and working with school communities. So first of all, we're going to have a presentation by Melissa and Chris about their book. So I'll tell you a little bit more about both of them. Melissa focuses on just mobility transition through Moda City Creative. So this is bridging the gap between design thinking and behavioral change. And we know that actually changing cities is not just about the physical transformation, it's about the relationship of people to place and about people being active citizens. This is very much what we are focusing on with our City for Children program at the Metropolitan Institute of Bratislava as well. And Chris's role is International Relations Manager at the Dutch Cycling Embassy, which means that he's sharing the qualitative benefits of cycling and multimodal transport systems. And there's a lot of inspiration about Dutch cycling, but this afternoon we also went on a short bike ride in Bratislava, and in the discussion I'd like to pick a few points and impressions from both of them, how they felt about the transformation that we've done in our city so far. So without further ado, Melissa and Chris, a warm welcome to you both in Bratislava, and the stage is yours.
Thank you, Petra, for that warm welcome. And thank you to the very full house. This is very lovely for us, so thank you. This is my first trip to Bratislava, Chris's second. So it's been nice to be able to cycle around with the group, and we'll talk about that probably more later. But for now, yes, we're here to talk about Chris and I's third book that we've co-published, Women Changing Cities. And our hope today is to give you a glimpse into what we learned in our interviews, sort of give you a bit of a taste of why we wrote this book, and some of the lessons that we hope that you can take with you for whatever it is that you're working on, be it big infrastructure projects or community level grassroots advocacy.
Who the heck are we? Always a good question. We always refer to ourselves as cycling advocates whose career trajectory being cycle advocacy that got way out of control. I am a recovering architect, Melissa, a recovering fashion designer. We worked in Vancouver, Canada for many years, or volunteered as a couple of bike advocates, and that spiraled very quickly out of control to the point where we visited the Netherlands for the first time in 2016. A few blog posts became our first book, Building the Cycling City. That caught the attention of a couple of Dutch organizations who wanted to hire us. Next thing you know, we're moving our family of 4 from Vancouver to Delft. The first year of our lives in the Netherlands formed the basis of a second book, Curbing Traffic, the Human Case for Fewer Cars in Our Lives, which tried to capture those quantitative benefits of living in a place with far fewer cars. And then, of course, yes, we've most recently written Women Changing Cities, which kind of culminated in years and years of working in this space and trying to tell a global story, not just of what was happening in the Netherlands, but what is actually happening in cities, in streets, in every corner of this planet of ours.
So before we dig into why we decided to write this book, Petra gave a little bit of a hint into some of the reasoning behind that. I want to just start off by saying that part of the reason that we write the stories we do and we both work in communications is because our experiences of cities really are the basis for storytelling. We form relationships that become stories we tell our children, or we have memories of places that we visit that become basically this idea of what a city can be and what it has been. And so for us, writing these stories is very much to build on that idea of sharing those stories, not just to capture a moment in time, but hopefully to help inspire others to see what is possible.
So after writing 2 fairly successful books about the Dutch experience, we're now asked, why did you decide to write this book solely about women? We try not to read the comments, but sometimes in the comments people ask us, why didn't you write a book called People Changing Cities or Men Changing Cities? Well, the answer is very clear. Despite the fact that women make up, of course, half of the population, they are still very much vastly underrepresented in terms of positions of leadership and positions of decision making. We seem to think we've solved this problem in the urban planning world, and we're here to tell you that's very much not the case. It is true that women and men are generally graduating at parity from urban planning schools and engineering schools, but this parity is not permeating up into those positions of leadership. It's called the leaky pipeline syndrome. There's plenty of cultural, structural, institutional reasons for this. But we're here to tell you we need to do better, purely out of, well, the tables at which we're making decisions about cities are not reflecting the people that live in those cities, best reflected by the statistic that Petra already mentioned. In the 300 largest cities in the world at the time of the book was written, only 25 had female mayors. I venture to guess that number may be even going the wrong direction.
So to understand the 11 case studies that we chose to focus on and the women we chose to interview, we'd like you to come back with us to the time not so long ago when everything changed. COVID-19 really was this sort of crisis as a turning point for a lot of cities. We all had to reimagine how we interacted with public space, and those that were making decisions around how that public space was allocated needed to find a new narrative to make sure that people could enjoy their cities, that essential workers could arrive safely to and from work, despite the fact that we had to be socially distanced, that public transport in some places was completely shut down. And so what we were seeing out of that was this shift that was happening in cities around the world, and a lot of leaders that were helping to make that happen.
So we were trapped behind our laptops like everybody, stuck working on our dining room table in March, April of 2020, and we started to see these kind of sprouts of optimism, things that were happening in different cities, 10, 20-year plans that were being dusted off and implemented virtually overnight. And Montreal was kind of the first example that really popped out on our screens, a city that's very near and dear to our hearts in Quebec in Canada, where the local business community there, purely out of survival, engaged with the mayor, Valérie Plante, and asked her for pedestrian streets. And what they did in that first summer was nothing short of revolutionary. 11 commercial arterial roads, 9 kilometers, fully pedestrianized, close to automobile traffic, not just for a few hours on a Sunday, but 7 days a week from May till September, and really working with the local businesses, the local artist community to make this not just a privatized street, but a public space that had art installations, benches, and all kinds of other activities, and was really, if you went there in the summertime in particular, it was being used by everybody in that neighborhood. It became an extension of their living room, and was really incredible to see in a North American context.
And of course, Paris was also a city that was very much standing out during COVID, and part of that through the rapid expansion of their school streets. Now over 220, I think, at this rate. School streets have been implemented throughout Paris, so not just in 1 or 2 neighborhoods, but throughout the entire city as a part of Mayor Anne Hidalgo and her team's hope to create an environment where children could not just arrive and depart safely from school, but also create social spaces for them and for their families and for the communities to be able to enjoy. And of course, alongside with that is how are people arriving at these destinations, these school streets? Rapid expansion of cycling as well, taking over temporarily what was just, a temporary reconfiguring of Rue de Rivoli that is now a permanent fixture on Paris's streets, along with many other places that gave Parisians another way of traveling in already a very busy city, and shifting it from being a car city to now very much a cycling city. And then with that, also recognizing the role of climate adaptation and mitigation. So with these street reallocations, planting trees, putting in rain gardens, understanding that Paris is a city that is going to be facing increasing amounts of heat in the years to come, increasing amounts of rain. How do we deal with that? Well, we need to build green, build nature back into our city to make sure that shade and water capture are a part of the future of Paris.
Just down the road, so to speak, in the European capital of Brussels, a city that does have a reputation of being very car-dominated, car-choked. Their mobility minister, Elke van der Brand, was undergoing her own revolution, a set of policies that was called the Good Move, that was inspired by a lot of the traffic circulation plans that Dutch cities implemented in the 1970s, cutting the city up into segments and preventing unnecessary through traffic from filtering through those neighborhoods. In addition, they were implementing a citywide 30-kilometer-an-hour speed limit that had tremendous impacts on safety, on noise pollution, on air pollution, and also at the same time they were creating the biggest pedestrian zone on the European continent, the first spine of which, Boulevard Anspash, began with a protest picnic on a Sunday afternoon by local advocates. That was quickly made temporary and made permanent, and that we spoke to Elke van der Brand a few weeks ago. She referred to it as spreading through the city center like an oil slick, but the good kind, and has become, really the backbone of Brussels. Still has a lot of work to do, but they've made a lot of progress in a very short period of time under her leadership.
Arguably the only good kind of oil spill that we should be celebrating. And then, of course, also here on European soil, the city of Barcelona was basically helping Barcelonians reimagine how they could use their space by taking over these broad intersections as part of their Superblocks program. Also looking at it from a very light, quick, cheap approach. How can we give people, these Mediterraneans with tiny apartments, access to outdoors in a safe and comfortable way? And doing so tactically, but also much more permanently. And what I think for us was really special about this was it wasn't just that there were wonderful social spaces where you saw people of all ages, but particularly in the evening, because of their gendered approach in terms of their approach, the handbook they use for designing urban space, also taking into account how do we build social safety, and so that even late into the evenings, we know that in Spain they stay out late, making sure that women feel just as comfortable. And then, of course, building on that, looking at how can we, in our own way, create school streets that allow children that safety and comfort to arrive at school. It is still very much a work in progress, which we'll talk a little bit about later. But it shows that we can reimagine how streets can look. It doesn't have to be the Paris way. It can also be like here in Barcelona.
It was also, of course, very important for us to get off of the European continent and to see other less likely candidates and contexts for urban transformation. We have a good friend, Fiona Campbell, who is, has been the long frustrated bicycle program manager for the city of Sydney in the 10 years or so pre-pandemic. She was only able to build about 15 kilometers of protected cycling infrastructure. In that first year of COVID-19, she built 150 kilometers, and that you can imagine how quickly they were able to move once they had the political impetus, with that fear that people would jump out of public transportation on top of getting to their cars on top of existing traffic. This became the motivation to build out their cycling network, to build it as quickly as possible. It's very much catered to the care trips, so getting kids to school, multitasking, connecting all of that mobility of care that has really seen an increase in the number of women cycling. Again, much like Brussels, I think Sydney still has a very long way to go, but has made big strides in and around the COVID-19 pandemic.
So around the time that we're seeing these stories very commonly in our social media feeds, we are also starting to see a shift in our own perspectives based on our work. So I, through some work with organizations like Women Mobilize Women, which is funded by GIZ in Germany, I was starting to also be exposed to women that were doing great things in other parts of the world, largely in the global south. At the same time, Chris is getting to travel to a lot more places and see a lot more of what's happening in cities that want to build out for cycling. And so it started to open our eyes to some newer stories that we felt compelled that should also be included in Women Changing Cities.
Yeah, so that journey for both of us began in Delhi. We were lucky enough to visit there separately through our day jobs, but crossed paths with a woman, an amazing woman by the name of Kalpana Vishwanath. And she is an entrepreneur, a feminist advocate, who created a mobile application that very much addressed a deep-seated problem that she saw on the streets of India, and that was the dominance of men in the public space and on public transportation, and how women were making decisions about where to live, where to go to school, where to work, based on where they felt safe and where they felt comfortable. And so through this mobile app, which is kind of it gives women the ability to do a safety audit of a given street or a public space, allowed them to collect tens of thousands of data points and then provide the municipality with data so that they could systemically address some of these darker spots in the city in a more targeted and focused way. So she has single-handedly first changed the policy approach in Delhi, in many other cities across India now, and it is spreading to her credit to Latin American cities as well.
So speaking of Latin America, one of those cities is Bogota. Bogota has a rich history for cycling, of course. It is the birthplace of the Ciclovia, if you're not familiar. It's a car-free Sunday they've been doing for 30 years now, I believe, and is part of Bogota's story as well as BRT. But through a COVID response initiative, that cycling infrastructure has been expanded, not just here like you see on the Septima, which is one of the main corridors through the city center, again to try to address that not everyone can fit in the already at capacity BRT. We don't want all those people going into cars, so we need to give them other options with bike share as well, but also bringing that infrastructure into the informal communities. And I think that's part of the important story here for cities, is it's not just about building where it's easy, it's also about building where it might be hard, but it's most definitely needed. And when I was in this neighborhood, for example, this bike lane was filled with people taking kids to and from school. You had small businesses running with cargo bikes. So understanding that this infrastructure is part of how people need to move and making sure those investments happen. And then at the same time, looking at the role of care in the city of Bogota. Most of the stats that we were reading when we were studying the book, we're seeing that women were traveling upwards of 2.5 hours each way to get to work from the informal communities. And so by investing in things like the cycle lanes, but also care blocks, which are providing vital services for women, for training, to learn new skills, to access the job market, but also providing things like childcare, laundry services, the things that would have kept them out of the job market, and training, for example, young children and other women how to cycle, building all these skills in a way that understands that how we treat the carers in our cities and how we create policies for them has just as much effect on everyone else in our city.
For another radical act of empathy, we were also cross paths again through our day jobs with a young woman by the name of Qendra Marrëdhënie, who was an advocate, well, an accidental advocate, a journalist in Manila in the Philippines, who when the COVID-19 pandemic hit was hearing stories of essential workers, hospital workers, for example, that were sleeping in their workplaces. They were walking 2 or 3 hours to get to work because the Filipino government shut down the public transportation system entirely for the pandemic. And so she got together with a bunch of friends, bought some traffic cones, filled some water bottles with orange, or painted them with orange paint and filled them with water, and built a 2-kilometer long pop-up bike lane, of course, with the cooperation or permission of the local government. On a Sunday morning, this bike lane was so well used that it formed the backbone of what was a pop-up network. The pop-up network has since been made permanent through some of the work that the experts from the Dutch Cycling Embassy have provided in terms of oversight. And now Manila has built out a fully fledged mode of transportation in a matter of 2 or 3 years, 500 kilometers of cycling infrastructure that didn't exist before COVID-19, thanks to that brave and persistent young woman.
And then we mentioned we might talk about Tirana. We are talking about Tirana. We actually got a wonderful tour from Simon when we were there writing the chapter for this book, and got to see this school street, for example, another city that understands that when we plan for children, we plan for all of us. And by creating these school streets, not only were they giving children back the right to the public space, and Ristani, when we spoke to her, referred to her experience bringing her children to the school when a school street didn't exist, was, you know, children in school all day, learning, playing, laughing, having fun, and then walking out to a sea of cars. And that was not what she wanted. And so how can we work with agencies to create places like this that give that space and that right back to children? And that extends beyond just school streets into playgrounds. Understanding play is a very important role in a child's life. This photo is from the Grand Park in Tirana that did not come into realization without controversy. People were very much against it, but now it is a beautiful playground that is all ages, so for children from 6 months all the way to 18. And I share this photo, we've had a couple comments about it, because the girls are on their phones, and a lot of people have a lot of feelings about that. But for us, what was important is this scene was not unique. It's young girls, young people outside being social together. And that's what this playground was able to create for them. And then, of course, like many other cities, also looking at the role of cycling in making sure that children and adults have another way of moving around in a city that had a huge influx of cars with the fall of communism, and now looking at how can we reclaim and redistribute that space slowly but surely. And we look forward to, in the next couple weeks, to being back there and seeing what's happened since.
So these types of urban transformations very much happen not just with top-down leadership, of course, but with bottom-up grassroots advocacy. And in places of the world where perhaps that top-down leadership was lacking, it was important for us to find those people that were moving the needle and getting stuff done. And another example of that was a woman by the name of Amanda Nagambiro, who is an urban planner based in Kampala in Uganda. Wrote her master's thesis in Apeldoorn in the Netherlands on the idea of bringing Dutch cycling culture to her city. Got laughed at, got mocked, got disregarded for the better part of 10 years in trying to implement some of this infrastructure, again, until her moment came with COVID-19 and being able to convince the mayor's office to just try out 2 non-motorized transport corridors in the city center. They attracted such ridership that they were made permanent. And again, and also a bike sharing system that she didn't just initiate, but found herself contributing financially to its ongoing maintenance when the sponsorship backed down. But again, like I think Brussels, like a lot of the cities we've mentioned, very much a work in progress and a lot of things that still need to be done, but those first steps are so important and have been made even in a challenging context like in Uganda.
And then last but not least, less of an infrastructure program, but you will see infrastructure. But in Latin America, of course you need the hardware, you need that infrastructure on the streets, you need the policy and the organizations, but you also need the people that are creating that support system. And what, at the Dutch Cycling Embassy, they refer to it as hardware, orgware, and software. And software being creating those social systems. And in Latin America, the Mujeres en Movimiento are a group of women in leadership roles that were seeing that leaky pipeline that Chris was referring to, seeing the women come up through the architecture, engineering, and urban planning firms and then leave before they were able to get into roles of leadership. And so by creating Mujeres en Movimiento, which translates to women on the move, they created this network for these women to be able to see they're not alone, to learn, to find mentorship opportunities from civic leaders or other leaders in the cities, but then also provide training, provide that networking with each other to help them with their career advancement, with this idea that we can bring more women into leadership, we can create more gender responsive design, but unless we also create those systems where we know that we have people to turn to if we're feeling lost, or we just need to know that we're not crazy in how we feel. That is the goal of what Laura Ballesteros and the other women's leading Mujeres en Movimiento hope to achieve and are achieving quite successfully.
So, yeah, what do all of these stories have in common? You, of course, are at a lecture called Women Changing Cities, so you know the answer to that question. For us, when we started this process, we saw what was happening in these 11 different cities, and we asked ourselves, what is it about women that is getting shit done? Why are they breaking through the status quo? Is this a coincidence, or is there something about the lived experience of a woman that is just creating fantastic leadership qualities? So over that process, that 2-year process, we interviewed every single one of these 19 women. We basically asked them the exact same set of questions, and this was one giant investigation to try to identify what are the leadership qualities that are resulting in these dramatic urban transformations, and how can we share them with the understanding that these are not exclusively female leadership qualities. Plenty of men already show them in other cities. Plenty of men can adapt them, but perhaps these are leadership qualities that we should be championing, identifying, and learning as we look ahead to facing the challenges of the 21st century. So we're going to finish up our presentation with those 5 leadership qualities that we conclude at the end of the book.
You go first.
How are we for time?
We have 6 minutes.
6 minutes. All right, here we go. So the first is, and this I always say, feels like a revolutionary act in 2026, but the idea of leading with empathy, of being able to think outside of your own lived experience to other stages of life, to other economic situations, perhaps best embedded by the feminist urban planning policies of Barcelona. And we know that the superblocks have now been put on hold, and we can perhaps talk about that a little bit later. But what you see in Barcelona in this neighborhood on a Sunday afternoon is really revolutionary. When you consider that this was an asphalt desert prior to this installation, and now there's young people, there's old people, there's rich, there's poor, all rubbing shoulders, playing chess, whatever, football. This has become reclaimed and new public space as a result of this feminist urban planning guideline. I think we can all agree that this is what we want from our cities, particularly in dense urban areas where a lot of these residents are probably stuck in an apartment otherwise for many hours of the day.
I think it's important to share the story. I forgot to share it when I was talking about Barcelona. When we interviewed Janet Sands, who is a counselor, what is her, you remember her title better than me.
She was a deputy mayor.
Deputy mayor.
Yeah.
Okay. She said that part of the reason she knew the superblocks were a success, despite the pushback that she was getting, is she received a letter from a citizen that said, "Thank you very much for this superblock here in the San Antonio neighborhood," because her 80-year-old mother, who's not 80 anymore, she's older, would come down every morning and have coffee with her friends, where before she couldn't do that. And so this gave her mother that social space to be reconnecting with her community. And that is that empathy and that understanding that I think we need to remember and we need to champion wherever possible. I just wanted to share that because I like that story. The next is to have a long-term vision, and this means for not just for leaders in political positions, but also for us, thinking not just how are we going to do this project that will have an impact in 2 years, in 5 years, but thinking 10, 15, 30, 50 years down the road. Projects that we might not get to enjoy, but that will have that impact. And the example that we like to share is from Tirana with the traffic gardens that they have. They have 2 of these safe environments for children to learn how to cycle, to be able to build those skills in a space that is away from hostile traffic, that allows them to learn not only how to ride a bike, but also how to fix a bike, how to do so around other people. And really with this long-term vision that while Tirana is building out its cycle lane, they're also building the next generation of cyclists. So thinking, okay, or Simon, we're adults, you know, in sort of middle life. We might not see Tirana be the future cycling city that we all hope it can be, but by creating environments like this, we're giving that future to the next generation.
So leadership quality number 3 is placing a value on the work of care. And you've heard us mention this idea of care a couple times. Very simply put, it is the non-economic work that is done on our streets and in our houses that underpins all of the economic activity that happens in our cities. None of that economic activity happens without this care work. You can't go to your job or go to school or do anything in your life without somebody taking care of you, and yet this happens invisibly in a lot of our streets, and in these informal communities in Bogota, for example, they're starting to place a value, an economic value on that care work. So making sure that it's not just about the long distance single purpose commute from the house to the office, but connecting where people live with where they shop, where they go to school, where they ride public transportation, where they visit community centers and friends' houses. That spider web of interconnected multi-purpose trips that we take throughout the day, often with codependence, and making that part of our mobility networks and our transportation systems.
Another, it's, I would say, not as unheard of as empathy nowadays, but this idea of building alliances is so important. This idea that we're going to need to make friends with people that seem like unlikely friends. We're going to need to have conversations, difficult conversations, with people that might not agree with us, but in doing so, we're actually building bridges and we're helping to move projects along instead of just fighting with each other. And Montreal is the example that we share there because, as Chris pointed out, this was very much an initiative from the business community. They were struggling. They asked the city, is there something we can do to make sure that we survive this crisis? And by working together, they've realized 11 of these types of public spaces, like Chris said, throughout the summer, spring, summer, and into fall, and creating spaces that really are not just inviting people to come and spend money, but just come and spend time. And so, you know, by working together with people that often we don't get along with, and, you know, businesses versus cities is a very common theme in the work that we do. They've been able to achieve some amazing success that we get to enjoy every time we travel there.
All right, last but not least, there is, as somebody referred to in one of our talks, our Lord and Savior, Anne Hidalgo. She, for many of you understand, has completely changed Paris in a very short period of time. But to the surprise of many, after 2 terms, she stepped down and said, okay, I've given everything that I can give. I'm out of time. I'm out of energy. I'm going to hand the baton to somebody with new ideas, new energy. And I think in 2026, where we're seeing a lot of people, old men, clinging on to power for as long as possible, there's a lot to be said about this idea of being able to step down when you think your race is run, and to be willing to make the unpopular or controversial decisions. And guess what? Your city will be a better place for it. This is the intersection of Rue de Rivoli and Sebastopol Boulevard. If you stood here 10 years ago, there would be 2 or 3 cyclists at any given moment. This intersection now sees 30,000 cyclists a day, and it's just amazing. You do feel like you're in Amsterdam, and that was just through the, Mayor Hidalgo's willingness to make the controversial decisions, to be called names in the media, to be threatened with lawsuits by the automotive lobby. She knew that she had this support of the quiet majority of Parisians who would vote for her in greater numbers the second time around, by the way, because she was ultimately making Paris a better place for all of its citizens. So we can learn a lot, I think, from Mayor Hidalgo.
So with that, we're basically on time. We'd like to say thanks for listening to the story of the journey of what is Women Changing Cities. If you have questions that we don't get to touch on today, feel free to reach out to us on LinkedIn. We're always happy to engage in conversation, see how we can help. But yeah, thank you, Petra, for having us. And we look forward to the conversation.
Thank you very much, Chris and Melissa. After the talk, you'll be able to also get hold of their book. But for now, I would like to invite Simon to give us a little bit of an introduction about his work in Tirana, which was already mentioned in Melissa and Chris's talk, before we sit down to have that discussion. And I'm sure you all have many questions for our guests. So Simon, over to you. And I forgot what I mentioned, that Simon is the co-curator of Start with Children. So really great to have him here and to brainstorm the future of Start with Children platform and future conferences that we will hold. So we'll keep you posted on that.
Hint, hint. Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really nice to be back. It's been a year since I've been here, and it's clearly a lovely time, lovely season. I'm going to talk very quickly about the work in Tirana and just kind of piggyback on this talk. And certainly goes without saying that our work in Tirana as a nonprofit, I don't work in the city or for the city. I have a NGO. And we very much benefit from strong female leadership and a lot of folks inside the city who obviously are parents and have a big personal change in their lives when they have kids. Our work is focused on making streets, especially sidewalks outside of schools, healthier, more comfortable spaces to move around. And I'm just going to very quickly talk about one project which has also combined a large cycle feature in front of a school and the first protected intersection, the Balkans. So you can see the basic setup, which is so common in Tirana, is just sort of vast tracks of asphalt in intersections. And the entire purpose here is just to really reduce the crossing. Here is the space in front of the school. This is again this is a COVID pop-up bike lane there on the left, on the right of the left-hand image, and that bike lane was kind of doing okay. It wasn't. It's a beautiful street, great shade, but it was really easy to kind of park on top of it, and it wasn't really doing much for the school. So the School Street portion of this project essentially narrows the entire section of the street to just one single lane, one single vehicle lane. Drop-off happens just a little bit back here. There's kind of a dedicated drop-off space there. And what for most of the area is a 3-meter wide bike lane, which is again just absolutely it's the first time we've had such a width in the city, and was the source of a lot of pushback. It's the same width as the vehicle lane, which caused a lot of confusion in the beginning of why could you possibly have these two things that are the same width when they're for very different uses. And you can see the other part about the School Street is that it just bumps out, and it allows so many more people to feel comfortable in front of the gate during the school run, at the drop-off and pickup time. Normally, those people literally just pour out and stand in the roadway, which doesn't feel great and is quite stressful. The space absorbs all of those people and creates a totally different energy there because it allows people to talk to each other, especially parents to talk to other parents, which is just, even if it's 60 seconds in a day, can really make a big difference in the sense of social networks and et cetera, et cetera. So it feels really good to be there. Here you can see just another view of what that looks like right at the school gate. Again, it very, very simply lets traffic keep moving slowly. But what I love about this image and just this angle of the project is how much it really feels like it minimizes the car's role in the street. You just get this sense that you sort of look around and you're like, oh, there is a car lane still there. It's just that it's just minimized. And I think about the Tirana School Street approach as something which can sort of, it feels like this can be all streets, basically. It feels like this is a kind of design approach that could really function in all neighborhood streets. And something that comes up in Start With Children a lot, something comes up in child-focused planning often, is that we're not just doing this for children. We're changing these streets in front of schools because we can kind of get away with it, but actually it's an approach that we should be using across the entire city. And I think of this sort of scene as something which you can really just tell people, you know, we could get away with this, actually. So 2 lessons very quickly. First of all, Melissa had pointed out the 2 cycling academies in the city, and they're wonderful new institutions, and they're so cool. And I think of this street as you graduate one step beyond, and you get to come here with your parent and actually test the scooter or the bike with your parent. And I think what's so important about this in general, and what's so important about this kind of width being in front of a school, is that the parents themselves are sort of more in need of the confidence than the children are, usually. Usually the kids have this kind of ease in the street where they just kind of go out and they're, you know, they don't know all of the, whereas the parents are the ones that are really often, when we talk to them, are the ones that are kind of preventing the kids from being independently mobile as young as we might prefer them to be. And so this kind of situation is just really nice. And before this project was even done, we would just be standing around. There's parents with kids on skateboards. There's parents with kids on scooters. They just came to this street and just used it as a place to practice all of these things. So, and then lastly, okay, so this is not really a great video, but I'm going to show it to you anyway. It's a first test. This is a guy who I met. So this is the second lesson that we've kind of learned so far. It's very interesting that this street has become it's full of tourists. And it is, this guy runs a bike tour company. And we were talking to him one day and he said, I take my tours down your street because I'll get a better review. And that has started a kind of thinking about the role of tourism. I guess probably a quarter of you have been to Tirana by now, because now there's cheap flights from Bratislava. But if you haven't been yet, I'm sure you'll go in the next couple years. Everybody's going. It is the place to go look at and just be for 3-4 days. And to be totally honest, there's not that much to do in the capital city. So people are taking bike tours. And he is running a very successful bike tour company. And so when we say that if it works for kids, it works for everybody, you know, the question also that we always get is, okay, we're doing this, but like, what's the economic benefit? What's the outcome of this? And we say kids' health, kids' well-being, parents' well-being, it's tough to quantify, et cetera, et cetera. So, but once we can start really making this case that the touristic city, and this is something that Hidalgo said in the very beginning of her first term also, that they wanted to pedestrianize the Seine. A lot of the bike work and the pedestrianization that they were doing was around tourism. So let's listen to what Dennis says. He made this for me super last minute, but it's funny. And then I'm done.
Hey, I'm Dennis, and if it wasn't for Tirana's bike lanes, I wouldn't be running a business. A couple of years ago, me and my girlfriend were cycling around, and we thought what a great idea it would be for people to explore Tirana through cycling. Then later on, we realized this is actually a business, and we've been running it for 2 years. When I got back to Albania, I started making some content. Over the passing of the years, we have the top-rated bike tour in Tirana. We've collected over 500 reviews. We run tours day to day. There's tours happening right now as we speak. Most of the tourists are from the Netherlands, but also Denmark, northern Scandinavian countries where cycling is actually part of their day-to-day life. We've also seen an increase from Germany and the UK, Italy as well. One of the most impressive things about all the people who do the bike tour is that they say that Tirana is so beautiful and so clean. They just don't know that I just take them to the best bike lanes in the city. At the parts of the city where there's less bike lanes, you always have this sort of like weird interactions with the clients where you kind of have to like be like, hey guys, this is a local experience, right? But ideally, you would want there to be bike lanes that interconnect the city all over. I'm looking forward to see cycle lanes grow in Tirana, and if you guys want to see them yourselves, let me know when you're in Albania.
Let them know. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Simon. So now I'll invite you all to sit down for our little discussion. There's a lot of food for thought, and get your tickets to Tirana. How many of you have been in Tirana from our audience tonight? 1, 2,
That's not very many.
3. And I was, so 4, that's four of us. So yeah, there's great potential for tourism from Bratislava. There's going to be space for questions from the audience as well. We're going to show you the code soon, also for those of you who are joining us online. But as I'm the host, I'm going to take the opportunity to ask the first question. And to all three of you, I mean, Melissa and Chris, you already summed up the 5 qualities of the women leaders, and they were the qualities to make the changes and the outward-facing qualities. I'm really interested in the qualities of how these women leaders have faced the adversity and the problems, because we know that women in leadership get much harsher critique. They are being scrutinized a lot more. We see it in national level politics with Jacinda Ardern or the Finnish Prime Minister. So when you spoke to these women, and let me just pick out a few of those things. I mean, Anne Hidalgo, she had an administration with 60% women, and she got fined by the French government for having more women in the administration. She proudly paid that fine, but there will be other stories. Like, how do you think that these women have been able to get shit done, as you said, and at the same time keep their themselves intact in this very volatile situation? And in Tirana as well. I mean, Tirana is a very, very fast-growing city with a very young population, as I understand. It's very dynamic. There's huge amount of new developments. I mean, this is a tricky place to be leading and making sense of it all.
Yeah, I mean, is it on? Yes. Yeah, I mean, it's a topic that came up again and again with everyone that we spoke to, is how to manage, how to deal. And I'll let Chris expand, but I just want to share, I think, so with Elke van den Brandt in Brussels, at one point she had to have a police detail because she was getting death threats, and her address was doxed, and she's a mom with 2 kids. Yes, they are older, but that doesn't matter, and with her husband, and that's quite awful to experience. But she, as she said when we interviewed her, her focus and this idea of prioritizing impact over power was she was elected to do a job. She might only have 4 years to do it. She thankfully was reelected, but in the time that she has to do it. That's what she was elected to be there for. And to her credit, she kept on, and she had a great team around her. She just recently was reinstated in her role in the cabinet after a very long. Brussels has a history of taking forever to pick their cabinet, and has said that it's starting to happen again. And she actually has ministers, when she says, okay, we need to do our tree trimming, you're not going to take away any parking, right? She's like, no, we do this every year. This is not new. I'm not touching the parking. But she's still dealing with it. And what was lovely is she said to us, you know, reading this book, reading her story, reading the stories of other people was actually really powerful for her to know that, again, she's not alone, but just a reminder of all the good work that she's done. And so that's sort of, you know, this idea of, you know, building this community around you that can help you keep pushing through.
It's interesting because many of the women case studies in the book have surrounded themselves with quite a few very capable women in different roles in urban planning and transport.
There's no doubt it's a huge problem, and it's only getting worse. And something, as Melissa said, we heard about from almost all of the women, but to their advantage, to their strength of character, they use this as a reason to just do things that were quote unquote controversial, because their mindset was, I'm going to get called names anyways, I'm going to create controversy no matter what I do, I may as well do something meaningful if I'm going to get pushback regardless. So that, I guess, you know, is one of the perhaps positive outcomes of this really terrible situation we find ourselves in. But this was the one, I'm convinced this is the one and only reason that Ana Hidalgo agreed to sit down with us, because we tried for almost 2 years to get an interview with her and could not. And then suddenly she agreed, very last minute, to sit with us. And I'm convinced that it was because she almost talked for an hour, not about the bike lanes or the school streets or any of the other amazing things she'd accomplished, but the problem that she saw with all of her peers in other French cities being attacked, being hounded out of office. The mayor of Marseille, who was also a woman, had just left. She's like, 4 years is all I can do. I can't put my family through this anymore. I can't do this. And so she saw this as a tremendous societal problem, and she wanted to talk about this endlessly because she was hoping that, one of the outcomes of this book would be to shine a light on this problem. But I honestly don't know about how we go about fixing it, about putting that genie back in the bottle, because the internet has made it so that anybody can express any horrible opinion with very little to no consequences.
It was amazing because in the book, you know, you said that Hidalgo said that you have to persevere as a woman in leadership to show the younger women that it can be done. So almost she was on a mission. But we know famously the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, she stepped down, and Ana Hidalgo also said, you know, I've done, you know, it's the your point about impact over power. It's like, you know, this is the change that I was here to do. I've done it, and others can now take over. It's not about being in power for endlessly and repeating oneself, but at the same time, quite a few of those women in the book have been in office for one term only. They've done huge amount of change in that one term, but it felt to me that it was almost impossible for them to stay, which is, I think, sort of disheartening and at the same time very brave of them to kind of step down and at the same time having done that change. Simon, have you got thoughts on that?
Well, just an observation about the book, which I haven't read closely, but I've been around it for a while now and kind of understand. But I think I do think it's really interesting.
There's a disclosure.
What just looking at what the projects are that are featured in the book, just from the presentation also, it's really interesting. It's just because it's so, it's not just bike lanes, or it's not just, you know, better sidewalks. It is care blocks or school streets, or there's all of these kind of really interesting, progressive kinds of features in cities that that are just now kind of being invented. And I think that's really interesting also, that it's, you know, it's this kind of, as many of you in the room, as you know very well, it's so hard to do something new in a city. It's so hard to build a new kind of infrastructure. It elicits so much violent feedback, and it puts all of your staff, the city staff, in great risk. They're sticking their necks out for something that doesn't feel like it's maybe worth it. Like, you know, they're putting themselves in a position of great risk, and that's another thing just about the leadership that's required to get a city staff to stick their neck out on a new type of infrastructure is really rare and really special, and something again that just speaks to these leaders' ability to persuade internally, and it's obviously, I mean, that's sort of like the great test of leadership is getting your own staff to sort of come along with, or in many cases, as we also know, a lot of these ideas are coming from internally, not necessarily the mayor, but the mayor is seeing them as valuable and then moving with them. So it's really exciting, just as a book of examples of great new types of projects and what their impacts are in cities.
I mean, I suppose there's quite a big deal of inertia in city administrations, and actually quite a few of the case studies and from my knowledge about some of the cities, there's a lot of change and turnaround of people within the administration, because you can't just come in with, as the new leader, making this change by yourself. It takes a team, as Simon said. So where was I going with this question? The continuity, of course. You already mentioned, Melissa, Barcelona, and let's talk about Barcelona, because I've just returned from Barcelona on Sunday night. I've been there for a few days, and the scale of the superblocks change and impact has been amazing in such a short period of time. And now there's been a change of political leadership, and the continuity is in jeopardy. As far as I know, that there isn't a continuity. They are not being scrapped, but they are not being expanded. So how the people you've talked, the women you've talked to, how did they feel about sort of leaving their baby that's, you know, already trying, you know, walking or running, but not quite mature, over to somebody who's not going to nurture and support that change, and how can this change kind of survive in the long term? What are the ingredients that make the continuity? I mean, in Anne Hidalgo's case, we know that the successor is somebody from her club, from her party, and there's a chance, you know, it looks like that will be continued, but, you know, you can't prevent political changes.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in the case of Barcelona, so for those that aren't aware, because of some of the court cases laid against some of the projects, that's all been stopped for now. As you said, it hasn't been scrapped, so the idea is still there. The idea has been there since the turn of the 19th to 20th century. It's been around for a long time. But what you've seen is sort of this shift, not away from the ideas behind the superblocks, but a shift in how we approach it. And so Ariadna, who's still at the city, one of those city staff that's powering through, she has shifted her focus. It was already there, but even shifting it more into the Save Our Schools and the Safe Streets environments for schools in Barcelona. How do we do that there? And the bike bus, yes. And then Sylvia, I always get her last name, Carasan, thank you. I always mix up the R and the S. Anyway. She is now working for the municipal region, and so she's approaching how to look at work from the region down. If she can't have that impact right in the city, then working at it on a regional level, but also still very much involved in advocacy there, still very much part of the bicycle, the BC bus, and just activism towards cycling. And Jeanette, while she still has a seat at the table as a minister, still fighting for those things. So it's just taking that and pivoting it, and we've seen something similar sort of in Montreal, for example, where both women that we profiled are no longer in office, but then finding new ways to support, for example, the local cycling advocacy to make sure that Montreal stays what we think is Canada's top cycling city, even if the politics has shifted slightly.
And people often say that and support it through, I mean, in Paris it was the referendum where, you know, people sort of vote once the day appears, you know, make that decision. So that's great. I'd like to turn to the men in our panel and ask you about why is it important that men are part of this conversation, and that it's not just us women talking to each other about how important we should be or could be, or what impact and change we could do. I mean, Chris, I noticed a while ago you've posted about the fact that people usually by default assume that Melissa has written the book and you're kind of like the sidekick, or I don't know. But you, I should say clearly this is a 50-50 collaboration. And Simon, you've as long as I've known you, I consider you a feminist. So I'm interested to hear from both of you and for our audience. You know, why is it important that you are active part of this conversation?
Well, I will say we knew the moment that we put women changing cities on the cover of the book that we were limiting our audience. That's the reality of the world that we live in. I'd love to think that a book called Women Changing Cities would attract a broad audience, but
look, we've got a full house tonight.
we do, and a pretty even gender split, which is we've done events now in 11 or 12 different countries, and that's not always been the case. I think, unfortunately, the reality is the moment that men see something with women in the title, whether it's a conference session or a book, they kind of think, well, that's not for me, that doesn't relate to me, that doesn't impact me, so, or I'm just going to give women the space to talk about this themselves. And
I mean, I found that always, as an architect, I rather always have described myself as an architect rather than as a female architect or a woman architect. And I found it always a little bit odd. I didn't want to put myself in that space of like woman architect. At the same time, I wanted to say it's important to, you know, to be there in that space.
So had we called the book, as I said, like People Changing Cities, Global Stories of Urban Transformation, it probably would have sold more copies and got more attention. Like that's the sad reality of the world that we live in. But we've said this again and again. You know, this can't be women talking about problems that they didn't create without the men also engaged in this. And so I commend every man that came out to this event this evening and continues to champion this, because women aren't going to solve these challenges themselves. And at the end of the day, the thesis of the book is we get better cities when we get more women involved in the decision-making process. Everybody benefits, so we all really ultimately need to work on this together.
And some countries, I mean, it also takes policies and top-level decisions. So some countries, I think, you described Scandinavia particularly, where they have policies to really kind of create space for women in governance and leadership. Because if you don't create that space, actually it doesn't happen organically or by default. You have to actually very consciously build that in.
I think some people bristle or are adverse against the idea of quotas, but for example, with Elke van der Brand in Brussels, she freely admits she would not be in politics were it not for a quota-based system that caused her party to recruit her. And it's the same with Mayor Valérie Plante in Montreal. She was recruited by her by her party to run for mayor, because I think women are less likely to think of themselves as qualified or transformational leaders, less likely to consider themselves experts. And so there are things that we need to do to actively encourage women to take these positions of power, because I think society's told them for years and years that they're not smart enough, that they're not good enough, they're not qualified enough. And sure, yeah. And that's why we see unqualified men in positions of power rather than, you know, the alternative. I see a lot of nodding. Thank you.
Simon.
As the American in the room.
I don't really know how to answer this question, actually, but I would say, you know, I think like the fact that we think about care as something that women do is like a problem. It should not be that way. The caring for children in public space should be done by everyone. It's not a gender thing. And the work that we're all engaged in is trying to make cities essentially take on some of the role of that care in a way. It's supposed to enable parents to nurture. And in Tirana, to use the example, streets and public space it's a thing that you're constantly fighting against, and as a parent. And we think about school streets, and we think about infrastructure as something which should be it should be shaped in such a way that it enables you to do the act of parenting in the way that you intuitively want to. You just can't because you have nowhere to sit. And so I think about, you know, I mean, it's a gender issue depending on where you are. In certain cultures, women at the moment tend to be doing more care. They're doing the domestic work at greater percentages, et cetera. So child-friendly planning is, it has a gender dimension to it that's very important to be aware of. But at the same time, it's also really important not to alienate anyone via gender at all. It's the act of caregiving should be one that I think is not connected to really gender necessarily. And I think that, I mean, what we do see in general is like mayors who become like child-friendly mayors, that transformation happens often when they have a child. That it is really, really strong. And I think that is very interesting that people are radicalized. People become radical urbanists by having kids. That's very interesting. That's for us as planners who want more radical planning taking place. It's very interesting to tap into a group of people who, for the very first time, see how bad that sidewalk is, or why that ramp doesn't work, and all of a sudden, I mean, I know so many people who this happens to, where they're just like, oh my God, like what the hell? And you just never thought about it because you never had to.
But even if, I mean, as an architect who's been doing urban design placemaking for even before I had a child, I had that aha moment. You know, going around with a buggy or trying to get places, you know, needing to go to the toilet at the time in London. I mean, it's quite almost mission impossible. So, you know, public toilets, all the sort of like care provisions, and, you know, where can you hang out with the kids? We've got quite a few kids in the France, as you could hear during our talk, so we are a very child-friendly place. We also have a children's mental health and the city exhibition on in our center at the moment. But these spaces didn't used to be so common. Like you wouldn't be able to take kids to places.
Well, and I think this is when it comes back to that first leadership quality that Chris was talking about, this idea of empathy. Because, of course, you're not wrong. I mean, we're cycling advocates because we were cycling around the city with our 1- and 3-year-old, and we're like, this could be better. This sucks. But I think that the more that we can bring empathy to our practices, even if we don't have children, even if we're, you know, man, woman, otherwise, you know, in a role of leadership or not, the more that we can just empathize with someone else's experience. Not to say that we understand it and we know it, but we just empathize with somebody. I think that's an important quality as well that we need to, it shouldn't take us becoming parents, especially because now less and less people are becoming parents, for us to understand the importance of a child-friendly city. So I think, yeah, for us as planners, as activists, as whatever you call yourself, being empathetic to someone else's situation, but then also, as we were talking about earlier, also making sure that the tables are more balanced so that it doesn't require a table full of parents or a table full of people with disabilities to recognize that we need to design the city better, but we just, you know, have a better balance of those people.
It's very interesting because I think it's what you say about empathy is also about awareness. So last year for the National Architecture Awards, one of the nominated public space projects was a barrier-free ramp, which was a project that we were involved in together with the city forests, and it was a very, very simple project, creating a barrier-free ramp into the recreational location in one of the gateways to the city forests. It was almost like, I would say, you know, I don't want to devalue the architecture, but a very banal project, but actually so meaningful in saying that actually for all these years, people on a wheelchair, with a buggy, or even with a bike, with small bikes with kids, they could not, because there's quite a big level difference to get into the meadow area. You know, everybody had to carry their stuff, and it was just really a big barrier that nobody saw for years and years. So I think raising awareness and pointing out that people have different needs and different abilities is really important part of the work. I'd like to open the stage for questions, if there are any, online or in the audience here. So you can raise your hand and the microphone will come to you, or we can have a look at Slido, whether we have any questions there. The QR code is on the screen, so you can join us on hashtag #StartWithChildren. And while nobody is yet raising their hands, we can continue this conversation. And let's get Simon to ask a question, because Simon, you said to me that you'd like to ask a few questions
I don't have one. I don't have one.
and Melissa. So let's switch to mics, because I mean
This one.
Hello, Thomas. I have a question, probably for all of you. Do you think there is some, except the Dutch and Danish cities, there is some peak of cyclists? Because in the last modal splits, we can see decrease of cyclists in Hungary, in Budapest, in Vienna, in the city of Trnava, and maybe some others. So what do you think might be behind this?
Do you mean, Thomas, that there's a drop in? Okay.
That's probably for Chris,
This is
as a cycling expert on this panel.
the
There seems to
international
be a
relations
drop.
manager.
There's a drop in some cities with cycling. Is it? Well, I mean, I've recently came across an interesting point. Somebody made it actually in Barcelona on this transport conference, that in one city, I can't remember which one it was, when they reduced it was in Dublin, when they reduced the price of public transport, they lost many cyclists, because most of the cyclists were students, and the public transport became really, really affordable, and they started getting public transport instead of cycling, which was an interesting phenomenon.
I'm very hesitant to draw any conclusions. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing about this, and so there's a million different possibilities running through my mind. Not the least of which is we certainly had a COVID-19 bike boom, and maybe this is just a return to the mean as cities return to quote unquote normal. But I wonder if those cities are also building out their cycling infrastructure networks at a pace with a level of ambition that meets the demand. And there's only so many times that you can put yourself in uncomfortable or dangerous situations before you'll say, forget it, I'll just take the bus. And I think we saw during COVID-19 that there are lots of people that want to cycle, that would love to cycle more, and did so when the traffic levels were lower and the streets were safer. But as perhaps that traffic rises and the infrastructure is not there, then people are choosing alternatives. But I'd love to learn more about those cities.
Maybe we can take that conversation backstage with Thomas. In the meantime, the question online we have is whether you have any socioeconomic data about the women in the book, and what is the common denominator. I mean, you talked about the common denominator in terms of their qualities like empathy and impact over power, but was there anything else that you felt like was similar, because they were so different? I mean, in Manila, in India, I mean, in the Philippines, it was, Sydney, and then, North America, Europe. It's very...
I mean,
didn't delve into their sorry. I mean, we didn't delve in too deeply into their socioeconomic background, their biography. We were more focused on the soft skills that they had learned. So I'm struggling to think what things like education levels or
I think in general, when we're looking at people in political leadership or civic duty, most of them are higher educated. So from a socioeconomic standpoint, that is a bit of a common denominator. They're starting with a bit of a leg up. I'm trying to think now if anyone wasn't. I don't think so. But yeah, definitely family makeup. And I was actually surprised when we were interviewing the women, because a lot of times in this space, when you meet women that are very far along in their careers, they're sitting in high levels of leadership, they have chosen not to have families because the job is extremely demanding. And I think most of the women that we actually interviewed do have families, many of them with young children. So it's, bringing that experience into their work, I think has been.
And maybe also the momentum, what Simon mentioned, like, you
Yeah.
know, they really felt the urge to actually make that change
Yeah.
through the experience.
Well, I was just going to say, like, I think of like Keisha Mayuga, for example, in Manila. So she's now based in Berlin, but she had this experience very much of when she was younger, her mom traveling for a really long time on a bus, and it was that conversation with another mom that reminded her there's got to be a better way, and that's what shifted her to cycling and cycling activism. But the story of Manila is not just Keisha's story; it's the story of oh my God, the name has just left my brain. The organization they started. Yeah, the Move is One Coalition. Thank you. And it's all young people of varying backgrounds, of varying education levels, socioeconomic levels that have all come together in Manila because they wanted to see this change. So, yeah, it makes me think that, you know, there are those opportunities, and I like sharing that story because it's not, I'm a middle-aged woman. It's not just a bunch of middle-aged people talking about this now. It's the next generation that's making it happen, and I like sharing that part of the story.
There's another question about messaging with family narratives, and I think this is actually quite interesting for Tirana because Simon, you know, even before Bratislava became the epicenter of starting with children, as we know it today, actually, even 10, 12 years ago, I was already reading about Tirana and how it was leading with this narrative about child-friendly city and the common denominator of the child, you know, caring about your children. So when you're talking, this question is about messaging to conservatives. Like, you know, you don't tell them like, here's bikes and bike lanes, but you start with children, I suppose. And how was that? How did that help Tirana get ahead?
Yeah, it's a very human way to talk about infrastructure. Like, I think we experience infrastructure personally, and I don't think we talk about it like that. I think infrastructure is thought of as from pretty zoomed out typically, and I think it's, you know, it's really, really powerful to especially around climate change. I think, you know, I think it's really, really important to I mean, I see what I would call conservative pushback against climate action a little bit more urgent, actually, even than like just mobility per se. But I think one thing that's very, very important about streets is that we feel them very personally, and they have a really important climate implication. In terms of mode, but also in terms of the way that they're designed, et cetera. The story of Tirana is so much about focusing on the kid and having these conversations around building, like basically steering a whole city's transformation and all kinds of development in around the needs of kids and families. And I think it can become a crutch. I think you can also just be like, no, it's for the kids, don't worry about it. And people don't buy that either, you know? I mean, it's not so simple. Parent drivers say that they're driving their kid because it's better for their kid. Just as much, so all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay. Well, I guess we're not gonna get anywhere with this. But I think yeah, I do think that it's not kids per se, but it's just like messaging around human experience and what we all kind of really need, which is which can be common, can be very useful and powerful.
I find that data, also in data we trust, and that's been very helpful for us in Bratislava to get the data and have the data. I remember actually the former mayor of Tirana who said that the way that they were messaging at the beginning was to say to Albanians, you know, how much what are you spending most money on? You know, are you spending more money on your children or on your car? And everybody would say, well, of course I spend more money on my child, like the child is the most important thing for me. And then they've done calculations how much average Albanian spends on the car per year and versus the child's, and it was a stark contrast, and it really kicks in, I think, this type of data. I mean, some of the data for Bratislava is not as flattering, but we are working on it, and it kind of gives us the impetus and the momentum. The number of cars per 1,000 inhabitants, we've got over 700 cars per 1,000 inhabitants, compared to Amsterdam, which is about 250 per 1,000. So there's a long way to go, but it actually really puts everyone in alerts. Like, you know, you've almost got one person per car. And if you actually look at how many, so we've had recently here in this space an exhibition about all the data about our city. And in the 70s, he would have usually 4 people in a car. But today, you mostly have 1.2 person, which equals to 1 person pretty much. And this is really ineffective. This is really unsustainable. This is economically unviable. And I think that makes it very important for us to focus on changing.
We, as a couple of North Americans, you know, we've given a good number of presentations over the years in the United States of America, and in particular in states like Florida. And what was really interesting for us is before we went into that presentation, you know, we were kind of warned, okay, half the room's going to be Democrat, the other half of the room's going to be Republican. You're going to have to find some common ground in the material that you present. So that gave us an opportunity to go back through our presentation and kind of look at it through that lens to try to find commonality there. And I think once you strip out a lot of the left-coded language, like feminism and stuff, there's a lot there for Republicans, conservatives to agree to, whether it's quality of life for children or quality of life for older people or economic prosperity or, you know, all of these things that we're arguing for, they would agree to if we just change the language that we use. And so I think there's a lot of, as we said, one of the 5 leadership qualities was build alliances. I think by building those alliances, we have to find that common ground from the left and right, because this cannot just be a progressive left-wing issue. This has to be something that people on the right of the political spectrum agree with. And I think fundamentally they do, if we just find new, different ways to frame it.
I mean, streets have become very politicized, and like Janet Sadikan's book, Street Fight, it literally feels like that. And what Simon was describing, it's so incredibly hard to make those very small changes sometimes to get started. Just as we have 4 minutes left, we've got a flurry of activity on the Slido questions. So let us see if we can somehow bunch them together. Was the main goal not only to improve active mobility, but improve accessibility of the city? I suppose that's
absolutely
clear.
Yeah, it was, and those most of the like we didn't actually ask about cycling. It was always about like what is the greatest challenge of your city, accessibility and climate.
Yeah. How to make walkability much more better, not only city centers, but also in the outer areas. So, I mean, I think that Bogota example was talking a lot about that, the care blocks and the distances. You mentioned 2.5 hours that women were commuting to and from work and other places to get groceries, etc. So that was a really good example. Anything else that you can think of also in Tirana on the outskirts and what's happening? I mean, you've got your beautiful cycle path there with the
city
with
center,
the tour guides, but
you know, office. I say tend to pilot in the city center, learn the lessons, and scale outward. We have also tried the reverse of that, and it was very difficult for a lot of different reasons, not least of which is just the resources of the city. To get a team out there every day to do that work was really resource exhausting, and so I think it's the school streets are a great example of this, but all of these types of projects have to be thought about from scale from the very beginning, and you're piloting, learning how to do them better, faster, cheaper, and then they go to the periphery. I think in my experience it's better that way.
Scalability is really important. We've proudly done that with our City for Children program, now working with 32 schools, and we have an open call running right now for the next 1.5 weeks, where you can still apply, the primary schools, if any primary schools in the audience. I know that we already have quite a lot of interest, and we will continue working. We're working with all of the city districts at the moment with these schools, and it started with one pilot school 4 years ago, and then there was a pilot program with 10 schools. Now we're on to making impact for 15,000 people by the end of this year. So really important to get the momentum going, but proving that the proof of concept at the beginning is the hardest, really. Do you have feminist male professionals as allies like Simon is? We do have Simon, and hopefully he'll be back more. And in fact, he was with us here in Bratislava at the beginning of the City for Children program. He was consulting with our team, and he was our advisor, because in Tirana they started to do the school streets earlier than us, so this was really, really useful. And having that exchange and knowing that you're not alone and that you can ask someone who's gone through that process, so that was very beneficial to us. Was it beneficial for you as well? That was part of the question. And
Can I
better
just
public space.
just the last bit in terms of if it's not easy. I mean, I think I have in my experience had male colleagues that are very much on the same page and would call themselves feminists, that don't always understand the challenge. And so I think it's knowing when to say, okay, I don't have all the answers, but then also being there to support, but then also to call out other male colleagues, because I'm not going to do that all the time. I will, but I don't want to. So, just making sure that if you have a male colleague that is, maybe not taking into account a more gender responsive approach, just pointing it out, because sometimes the woman in the room might not feel comfortable doing that. That's what being an ally is as well, is being okay standing up and telling somebody they're wrong.
So I think we can end on the note of speaking up and getting shit done. Pretty
Feelings
much.
are okay. We all have them. It's okay to say you have them.
I think they mean that in some smaller places in Slovakia, basically on a Friday night or on a weekend, there's like nothing happening. And I mean, if I could respond to the question, I think it's a combination of things. It's not just revitalizing the public space and the people will come, but I think it's also about programming and about social care and activities. So at the moment we've got, for example, there's a process of reviving the new market hall in Bratislava, and it started with a pop-up market, and now it sometimes opens on the evenings. And I think it takes a lot of curation and programming and care, but the public space definitely helps.
Yeah, well, and I would, this sort of came up when we were cycling around is, you see lots of people out cycling now, the weather's nice, people are enjoying it, but there is a drop-off in the winter, like most cities. But it's remembering that your cities are still alive in the winter. They might be darker and they might be colder, but finding ways to program. And we see some Canadian cities doing that are arguably much colder, but are activating in the winter because, we still need to get outside. We still need to have those social spaces. Kids like playing all year round, so we need to give them those spaces to do that. And yeah, absolutely. Even in small towns, having the programming is part of engaging the community to come out and be around each other.
And I'd like to wrap up with a very quick fire of questions to all three of you about our cycle tour this afternoon. Any impressions, thoughts, positive, negative, what can be improved, what surprised you, or, Chrissy made a note about the tram line.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I said this, we've done some media, and basically I think it's a work in progress, and the pieces of infrastructure that have been built are very high quality. The details are very impressive. The tram line in particular that we cycled with the grass trams and the bidirectional cycleway, that's a hallmark project that many North American cities would be jealous of. But you do not have the consistency of the network that's really going to result in moving the needle in terms of people's car ownership and travel behavior. Because, as he was saying, you can have the most beautiful piece of infrastructure in the world, but if that throws you into traffic or into a stressful situation, you're just going to not use that mode of transport there. So I understand there's an election coming up, so things have maybe slowed down, but hopefully post-election you can pick up the pace again and build out that network. Because once the links of the network fall into place, that's when you really see behavior change and culture change happen.
Simon, you've been here over the years, so have you seen change today that you haven't seen last year?
A lot, yeah. As someone who just spent like 16 months working on one intersection in Tirana, I know how difficult these things are, and that stretch. What's the street name here?
Nadácia?
Yeah.
Yes.
Wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah, that was recently.
Yeah.
Complete.
Yeah. No, I think it's really exciting, and I mean, also, I was just saying the fact that the space in front of the market hall will also be open for a future Start With Children conference is very exciting, because I've hated that space. It's been so bad. And now, yeah, it looks very exciting.
Great. And Melissa, any final thoughts from our bike tour today?
I was asked on the bike tour if I felt that the infrastructure was safe. I was cycling in a group, so yes. On my own, I think I would have, it's not, like, what I really look for is that idea of intuitivity, because I get lost really quickly. I don't know if I don't know where I'm going, and I think that's an area for improvement for sure, is that wayfinding to help people know where to go. But the fact that, and I forgot the name of the neighborhood, but the
Petržalka?
Yep. The fact that the cycling goes all the way out there and it connects is an important part of that link, and kind of links back to this idea of walkability and how do you make sure that, you know, small areas are too, is that it's not just in the city center. City centers are great places to pilot, and it's often easier, but until we get out into the neighborhoods where people actually live, we're never going to see that uptick.
Yeah,
so.
that's for our listeners online. That's a 4.3 kilometer new tram line with a segregated cycle path alongside, which is very, very, very nice. Before we have a big round of applause, let me go back to thanking our partners for the Start With Children lecture series. Nadácia, Allianz, Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands in Bratislava for tonight, because of our guests from the Netherlands, and the ambassador joined us for the bike tour as well, which was lovely. Karel Komárek Family Foundation, and ATOPS. Thank you for all of you for coming tonight. You can follow the next program on startwithchildren.com. Also here at Tuba we have other activities about women, which was the topic tonight. In June, there's a series of workshops and discussions, so you can have a look at the tuba.mib.sk, I think. And thank you so much for our amazing guests tonight, Chris Bruntlett, Melissa Bruntlett, and Simon Battisti. Thanks, guys. And if you'd like to have a look at the book or buy the book, you can buy it at the info point at the front. And the copies that Melissa and Chris have brought also have a stamp and a signature. So they're signed. So enjoy the rest of your evening.